Hey everyone, welcome to the Security Revenue Live show. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We're looking forward to this episode. Once again, my name is Taylor Wells. I'm your host and also the CEO and founder of the Cyber GTM Alliance. I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. Before we jump into it and do some introductions of our guest today, we're going to be talking about OEM partnerships. So I'm really excited for this discussion. I was just talking to my guest earlier about this in regards to this is an area of partnerships that I'm not super familiar with, but I think what we're going to find out is potentially a phenomenal opportunity for certain cybersecurity organizations and a go-to-market strategy that can be an unlock. So really looking forward to that. If you have questions, if you're joining us live, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll try to get to those throughout the discussion and integrate them. If you want to share this conversation with your team afterwards, we will send out the recording and it will be available on our podcast, YouTube, and our website. So let's jump right into it. Let's do some introductions. I got two guests here today. Michael, let's start with you.
Thanks, Taylor. Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Niswender. I work for NIA, and we are a provider of deep packet inspection security technology. Our exclusive go-to-market here at NIA is OEM. I'm somebody who has pretty much only done OEM throughout my sales career. I tried once to shift to more of a strategic alliances role, and the first thing that happened when I got there, Cisco, they discovered that they had some things that were OEM and needed them to be managed, so I couldn't escape it. But it's a sales channel I'm deeply familiar with, and look forward to have the chance to talk about it with all.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate that. Raja.
Thank you, Taylor. Thank you for the opportunity. Raja Chokalingam. I worked for a company called Imperium, manage our OEM partnerships, and whereas Imperium is the leader in the mobile security space, both on the mobile threat defense side as well as the mobile application security. And that's just not me saying it. That's according to Forrester. And I'm probably going to talk about this a little bit later, and because that kind of lays the context for the experiences that I'm going to share with you all. Look forward to it. My background's really cybersecurity. I've been in this space for over 25 years. Started out identity access management, privilege access management, SIEM, security data management, got into DevSecOps, and now in mobile security. I've been on the professional services side, been on pre-sales, and now, managing partnerships, which is kind of exciting.
Very cool. Awesome. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. And let's jump right in. So we were talking beforehand, and this is actually an interesting context setting for the audience and something I learned even last week, connecting with you all in regards to even the differences in your OEM programs. So actually, I'll start with you, Raja. Can you kind of describe from your perspective how yours and Michael's OEM programs are different? And then Michael, I'll have you kind of share from your side how you kind of see how your OEM programs are different. Because I think the audience, it's fascinating, number one, and that can kind of also be a springboard for understanding the context where you both are coming from. So yeah, Raja, you want to give us some context of how you see it?
Yeah, there's a whole gamut of things, models in the OEM partnerships. People talk about inbound OEMs versus outbound OEMs. Inbound OEMs, so we're a mobile security company, and if we incorporate a technology from somebody else and that becomes a part of our overall solution, basically because there's a certain capability that we need, that is inbound OEM. Outbound OEM is when we take, and that's what I'm going to be talking about, when we take our offering, our tool, our capability, and provide it to somebody else. So in this context, we provide mobile threat defense. Think about this, right? The best-in-class mobile security company partnering with best-in-class mobile endpoint management or an endpoint security company. What does that do? This strengthens and completes their platform story. How does one go and talk about, look, I secured endpoints if you're leaving out the mobile endpoints? So that's the kind of the other kind of OEM. Now, that could happen in a couple of different ways. It could be simply a white label offering. So they go, look, I need a complete endpoint story, but I don't know mobile. I don't have the expertise. I'm going to connect with Imperium, and they're going to give me their tool, but that's going to be white labeled as mine. That's one way to do it. And then another way is it's white labeled, but it's also fairly well integrated into their platform. Why is that important? Who doesn't talk about a single pane of glass, right? There's security leaders that are bothered with multiple siloed tools, and they have to stitch them together, do the integration, and you got teams looking at this console and that console. So that problem also, the simplicity, the complexity problem needs to be addressed. And so these OEM partnerships evolve, right? It isn't just about white labeling and so that they could sell it. It's also about integrating it into their platform so that you get better quality detections and resolution times addressed, alert fatigue is addressed, all those kinds of things. So you're really going to see a spectrum of these things, and it's all kind of going to point to what is the best better together story that you want, that you go after.
Fascinating. Thanks, Raja. And I love that. Thanks for framing the outbound versus the inbound OEM. I think it's a great, in my mind, a way to understand it. Michael, how do you see I'd love to hear about your specific OEM program. And then how do you see it contrasting with maybe Raja's and how you understand it?
Sure. So where Raja's and Zimperium are on the finished solution, white label integration, I'm much closer to component level. So, OEM, original equipment manufacturer, is what that stands for, in case anybody didn't have that. And that means we build something that is in its own right. It's not really built to be used standalone. It's built to be used within another product. So OEM comes typically from physical manufacturing, like you build wiper blades and they're really, really good and they put them on Ford motor cars, right? So that's sort of the model. So we build technology for deep packet inspection. Our customers are vendors who sell those solutions, SD-WAN companies, firewall companies, secure access service edge, anyone who has a network solution that requires the ability to know what is in the packet traffic going across the network and wants to do things with that. They want to discover if there's risks and malware in that. They want to know just what the traffic is so it can be blocked or prioritized or routed and just understood. So a whole multitude of use cases arise out of this core capability. And broadly, I think of OEM as, there's some technologies that I like to refer to as natural OEM. You could go build your own DPI, and some do, but it's a core competency that we've so specialized in that it doesn't really make sense to go and do that business-wise. And there's others. My career has not stayed in one technology, it's stayed in one business model. But I've done OEM licensing of everything from embedded databases to linguistic tools to analytics tools, reporting, things that they have unique functionality, and your company has unique IP that can be utilized in whole or in part as a complement to another solution. So the component level OEM it's usually an engineering level sale to people who are making product decisions, product management, engineering leadership, who say, we're not going to go build a content repository for our electronic medical records solution. We're going to go source that from the best of breed vendors if they have an OEM.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate the context. And I see we got a bunch more folks joined us live. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. Love to answer any specific OEM questions you have as they come up. Awesome. Well, cool. Thank you. I love that. Thanks, Michael, for sharing. I think the natural OEM, I'd love to dig a little bit more into that. If you wouldn't mind sharing your thoughts on that, because I could see there could be, from my perspective, I could see there be on both sides. If it's a natural OEM, whether you want to create a product or there's an organization that just isn't going to build something. So I'm hearing like on both ends. I'm curious from like the vendor side, or if you're thinking about getting into the OEM space or creating a solution that's OEM, that's natural for OEM, what sort of identifiers would you see from the vendor side, not so much from the customer side? Any thoughts there?
For me?
Well, yes, either one. Yeah, Raja, go for it. Yep.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it needs there has to be a joint value proposition, right? And there has to be clarity on both sides on what that joint value proposition is. And that joint value proposition, the better together story, from the customer's perspective, not necessarily from ours, right? From the vendor's perspective. When you have that, then the rest of the model falls into place. It's a value proposition that needs to not only apply to the people in the field that we sell to the ground level, but also to the CISOs and the CIO. And to me, that needs to focus on the customer's pain points. Let's look at that. Here are the challenges that the cybersecurity buyer, some of the challenges the cybersecurity buyer faces. I talked about some of this, right? They're managing a complex set of siloed tools, and they're facing a growing attack surface, and this thing is just ever growing. And they're expected to establish a defensible and demonstrable security posture through all of this. And all of this, they have to do this when there's a shortage of skilled staff, limited budget. The joint solution, and I'm going to talk about it from my perspective, my experience, the joint solution must address all of these in a unified and compelling way for both parties. And how do we help our CISOs and the CIOs build out a more secure and resilient operation while still simplifying their operations? Ultimately, that it all comes down to that, right? That's the outcome that we're looking for. And think about this. Say one of the OEM partners, they go to market and with the message that they're securing endpoints. How do they do that while not addressing mobile endpoints, especially in this day of everything being mobile first, right? So one focus on the completeness of the solution from the partner. That's one, right? Let's talk about another example. When the partner goes to market and they're saying, well, I'm leveraging AI to automate and improve detection of, any kind of malicious activity. I'm going to speed up your threat response. How do they do that without a best-in-class mobile threat defense capability that they can correlate, right? And better at identification, better at being responsive. And we talked about that simplification um, uh, uh, goal. And when you have a crippling alert overload that most security teams are facing, we need to show how a seamless alert correlation lowers that cognitive load and provides measurable operational efficiency. And same thing with identities, right? You see security companies talk about um, uh, identity threat detection and response. And what are they doing? They're protecting against and responding to identity-based attacks. Tell me, how do you do that without also protecting the identities on your mobile devices, preventing phishing and malware-based attacks that steal credentials? At the end of the day now, that's how most of these attacks start with, identity-based attacks. Now, if we want a better together story for the CISOs, these are the kinds of outcomes that we need to address. And for all of these, integration is a necessary condition, but it's not sufficient, right? We have to talk about several other aspects of it as well.
Thanks, Raja. Michael, any additional thoughts you wanted to share?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Raja and I, we're in the same field, but we're almost in two different worlds, right? For me, the approach to the business is much more about identifying those functional gaps that the company I'm working for has unique intellectual property that will fill those. And that natural OEM comment I made earlier is, it's something if you're a revenue leader and you're looking at your company's product line and it's really an assessment of, do you have core capabilities that are unique differentiators that you can see that they're enablers? They aren't, you're not going to OEM away your secret sauce, right? Your unique IP that makes it possible for you to sell your product directly. But if there are core underlying functions that you've invested a lot in and built, there's a reservoir of value that you can tap into by selling that through the OEM channel. I can give you a really relevant example. I worked for a company called Webroot, which was in the cybersecurity space, later acquired by OpenText. And Webroot had an endpoint security product and MSP product, a managed version of the endpoint security product, if you will. And along with that, it had a repository that kept track of malicious files, URLs, data reputation scores, looked at IP addresses, and told you whether they were good or bad or what level of trust you could put in the IP addresses. And it was built in order to make the endpoint security and the MSP product work better. But in its own right, it was a high value set of IP. And it turned into a business that could be licensed to other security companies. So giving it away or selling it didn't diminish the value that it had for Webroot. In fact, it enhanced it because it became a threat feed. So we took all that aggregated information and we made it available as a SaaS service offering that the other security companies would subscribe to and use the information that we gathered from our endpoints to inform their product. So, we told you a website was bad. Guess what? Let's use that information within our product. It also, interestingly enough, provided new sensors. So those companies that deployed that technology gave that information back. Through our OEM business, we actually enhanced the value of that threat feed. So it's a little bit of a discovery effort to say, yeah, this is a business we should be in. You have to be fully committed to it. You can't just, you can't, one of the worst things to be is a sort of halfway into the OEM business, because your customers will eventually figure that out. And, these are partnerships that you build for the long term. And the way to look at that kind of revenue opportunity is, do I have something unique, this natural OEM, an embedded database, what have you? And is it something that I can fully support and sell? It becomes an additional revenue stream. My CEO at one company said, it's like we're pumping oil and there's this gas coming off that we've just been lighting on fire and letting it burn. And then somebody realized we could bottle that and sell it. And that's the additional revenue stream.
Super cool. I love that. Thank you for both of your perspectives. And I'm curious, I'm sure you've all have worked with, and I know you've all had responsibilities in other areas of partnerships. I'm curious how you see either channel or VAR or any other sort of kind of partnership, relationship ecosystems or alliances or whatever they may be. How do you see OEM being different from them? And I'll start with you, Michael.
Sure. There's a lot of cases where VARs and GSIs are really good OEM partners. They're sort of a hybrid, right? So, I've worked a lot with big consulting firms where they're building a bespoke application, something unique. Deloitte's building some, crazy tax solution or something like that. And they're actually great partners to say, we need this unique capability. We're looking for this, this special screwdriver to do some unique function in this complicated solution we're custom building. You need to build relationships with those kinds of companies so that they're aware of your technology. And then those unique solutions present themselves from their engagements. And it's often been the case for me that working with partners like that, they build a one-off once and then realize that within their practice, that's reproducible. So then they're an OEM customer, the way a typical product maker is, but there's somebody who can kind of provide the connection that you would never see, right? As an OEM provider, you aren't usually at the edge of the enterprise looking at those use cases at the implementation level. You're looking at it more functionally, but those GSI partners and VARs will bring those to you. So with the right product, it makes sense to cultivate those partnerships, and it can be complementary to your growth.
Very cool. Raja, any thoughts on the kind of the differences you see?
I totally agree with what Michael said. Look, at the end of the day, whether it's an OEM partner or a GSI or VAR, there has to be alignment of objectives, priorities. And then there are other things that make it successful or not, right? Things like sales enablement and commitment to stay current, commitment to build out a joint go-to-market message, all these kinds of things. And when those things are in place, it can be successful. And when you don't, I mean, if I'm just going to add it to my marketplace and it's going to go somehow, it's going to happen, well, that's a different model. I'm not saying it's not a good model, but that's not what we're talking about here, right? Here, there is a set of objectives, set of goals that we're aligned on. And then we're jointly going after some outcomes. For that to happen, certain things need to take place. Sales enablement is one of them. Conducting joint marketing campaigns is another one. And even down to how do you do account mapping, right? Should you do account mapping, incentives, and so forth? And one of the things that our experience tells us is don't forget the operational rigor behind all of this. In order to sustain a partnership like this, you need to operationalize certain aspects of it. What does that mean? You need structured quarterly business reviews to define and align long-term strategies. Things evolve, right? It evolves with the partner, evolves with us. How do we keep up with that? And how do you proactively identify opportunities? And really, to me, most of all, it's continuous improvement. The willingness and the means to make adjustments in order to get better results in an ever-changing world.
Love that. Thanks, Raja. And I'm excited to get into kind of the go-to-market, the enablement. After it sounds like once you identified a partner or you've created that joint value prop or you've identified, some IP, Michael, from your perspective, what do you do next? And then how do you actually make a successful partnership? Because I know, Raja, when you and I were connecting even last week, the word alignment came up so much. And because I know as a go-to-market leader, it's hard to get alignment internally and be consistent with it and to be, and then so to how to get alignment internally and externally. And then how do you have both of those, ships going in the same direction. Excited to get into that. We actually have a bunch of questions from the audience I'd love to get into before we get into those other topics. Andrew asked, and I'll throw this up on the screen. Andrew asked, outbound OEM is relatively easy if the org you are OEMing through comes to you and wants something you can help with. In this case, negotiation and integration discussions over lobster and wine. He's oversimplifying. It's far harder to go and find and research an OEM partner that you can convince to embed your product in order to amplify your reach to market. How much tougher is that? And what is the viewpoint on strike rate and time scale? Any thoughts, Michael? I see you chuckling over there.
Yeah, and Andrew, you feel the pain of the OEM salesperson because the go-to-market. I sometimes compare it to a lot of marketing and lead generation is fishing with a net, right? You know where the school of fish is. You throw it out. You sort through the fish. OEM is spearfishing. You're swimming underwater. You're looking for that one target and hopefully getting. So it's a challenge to target, and like most of us, people are a little bit resistant to inbound, like, hey, we'd like to add something to your product that you haven't thought of yet. Thank you. So it's tough to pierce that, but that's kind of the approach that's required. I like to think of OEM sales at component level, embedded OEM sales. It's both sales and partnership. It's strategic and tactical. You have to establish trust. People are not partnering with you just on a transaction. They're looking at you and assessing your IP and also your staying power as a company. Are you somebody who, this is where Raj and I align, do you create a shared value vision with them? We're going to supply you this, and we're going to keep the roadmap up to date, delivering this value over a long period of time. And you, the customer, is going to embed this within your product, or we're going to have some go-to-market model that's going to sustain us with recurring revenue as you grow. We're going to grow this together. We're not after the money of the manufacturer. We're after helping them get more money from their customers. Building those trust relationships, you're a trusted advisor saying, here's why this technology that we're adding will enhance your product. So finding those receptive product leaders, it is the tougher part of the job. But the good thing, the payoff in this sort of sales model is those tend to be long-lived relationships. And, if you're in a smaller company, you get a lot of scale. If you can go to whatever sector you're in, if you can go to a major logo in that sector and become an embedded component within their product, all their growth is what drives your growth. And if you're horizontal across an industry, like many times I've been across cybersecurity, when the tide rises, all the companies are lifted, and that's great. Your revenue grows almost passively. So it's worth the investment. It's just not easy to find those entry points. And, no amount of lobster will overcome that, but it's a nice sales tactic if you can expense it.
I love it. I love it. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it. So I guess that's our, and they wouldn't need any of us. Raja, any additional thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that I would recommend is, look at the big picture and prioritize. There's so many OEM opportunities. There's always, quality over quantity thing. And so, Michael talked about, if the OEM partner is a big enterprise sales, they've got reach, they go into market segments and so on and so forth. I mean, that's a huge advantage to smaller players like ourselves, right? But at the same time, make sure that there's the kind of commitment and alignment. It's one thing to incorporate your technology, put it in the catalog, and there's a web presence and so on and so forth. But at the same time, do they have the commitment to get aligned on go-to-market side, right? And because you may be introducing an area that's not core to what they specialize in, and so how do they? I mean, do they have the commitment to invest in and make it a part of their own? And those are some of the harder things. There's the technical integration. And to me, that once it's done, there's the ongoing thing of how do you keep it current? How do you keep the skill level, the enablement, all those things current? And those are areas that I find myself spending a lot of time on and really passionate about how those things are important and how they need to happen.
Thank you for sharing. I'm curious, just a thought on mine. We have a couple more questions we'll get to on the chat, but I'm curious from my perspective. I know it's probably different based on the organization and the structures, but I'm curious if you're looking for a company to identify, are you, and let's say it's a large company, right? I guess it's probably so different, but I'm just curious, what types of people are you working with? Are you mostly working with product people? Or who's the gatekeeper to kind of get the conversation started with an OEM? Is it usually a partnership leader like yourself, a peer or is it more product folks? Or yeah, just curious what's your experience. If someone were looking at like, hey, I see a company that I think we have a value that we can provide. Who's that person in general, their title or their seniority or their role? Any thoughts, Michael?
Yeah, for me, it's interesting. It can vary quite a bit. Sometimes the entry point, even to a very large organization, is an engineering level person who's just somebody responsible for building a particular part of a solution, and they understand the requirement and they see the fit, and they can become the internal champion that can drive you. You know, you go up the chain later. I would say very few OEM deals start at the C level and work their way down. That may be an entry point just for, hey, here's a high level idea. Can you direct me within your organization to the product team that might be responsible for this? But it always, I've never had a successful OEM sale that didn't take place kind of in the trenches. That's where the design win takes place. That's where you present the technology and it gets validated. Because at least on my level, these are functional. They need to work and provide clear added value on the technology side. So it gets one there, but probably the most logical entry point is product manager, director of product management, even VP of product, depending on the size of the company. Somebody who has the forest view and the tree view. They understand that there's a gap and they have the strategic view to say, yeah, in our roadmap's 18 months out, but when we need at that point, having your component within our solution is going to make a difference. So look for the people that can see that.
Very cool. Raj, any thoughts on that question?
I agree. I mean, product leadership
Cool.
is key, and go-to-market leadership to me is equally key. Because if you don't have alignment on the go-to-market side, you can do all the work on the product side, and you're not going to see, at the end of the day, the outcomes we're looking for is increased revenue and market reach, and do that in a sustainable, scalable way. Do we have the commitment and the willingness to do that?
Love that. Yeah. Let's talk about that. We have a couple more questions, but one of them is on this go-to-market side. So let's dive into that. Roger, let's start with you. What's your thoughts on, okay, we've identified both sides, it's the honeymoon stage. Everyone is super excited. We've signed the partnership agreements or whatever the initial engagement is. And what's next? How do we create? I know you mentioned QBRs. What other sort of things, structures are needed? And then any thoughts on creative go-to-market strategies you've seen, or anything you can share of like, oh, wow, I wish I knew this 10 years ago when we talk about go-to-market and things there.
Well, I mean, number one is creating a joint value proposition. This is what my message is going to be. This is the better together story. And then the next thing is, how do we enable the different functions? Sales enablement is important. And I mean the actual account executives, not just the sales engineers. Look at things like building out battle cards, objection handling, persona-based messaging. If they're talking to the CISO, what should the value proposition be? If you're talking to the SOC leader, what should the value proposition be? And so on and so forth. All of these are needed so the go-to-market folks can do what they need to do and sell with confidence, even in situations where that may not be quite in their core domain. Joint marketing campaigns, joint webinars, co-branded white papers, and all of that. Now, these things need to all happen in parallel. So when the launch happens, you're ready. We, in our situation, we benefit from the wider reach and the existing relationships that the OEM partner has. So defining cross-sell campaigns to leverage their incumbency and reach, super important. And really, I would, through all of this, and then, there's also the, co-selling and account mapping. That whole area is there. The cadence to do joint, pipeline build, what's working, what's not working, where are the gaps, and so forth. And one of the things that often overlooked is the operational rigor behind all of this. To scale and sustain, you must operationalize. So that means, we talked about the QBRs. How do you identify opportunities and the continuous improvement process? And we've even started to, actually build out really a joint, what we call product release process, right? And because look, at the end of the day, no one says that this is not complex. We're dealing with two different companies, each with its own culture, organization, objectives, processes, priorities, all of those kinds of things. And that requires some joint process and coordination. What we've done is we co-create documented the joint product release process with each partner, right? And that is process flows, dependencies, what are the triggers, what are the artifacts, when do things need to happen? So there's clarity on both sides about what is expected, when, and how, and so forth. And this is different functional areas, right? And this way we can hold each other accountable, and there's alignment and coordination between the functional teams. There's a lot there, but look, if it were easy, we'd all be doing it.
Yeah, totally. And thank you for sharing. It sounds like I kept actually thinking of like almost product marketing, where when I've ever led the kind of product marketing roles, there was looking at, from really the kind of the entire organization, looking at what is our release cycle, looking at what is the roadmap. And so it sounds like you're doing that, but obviously combined organizations, and doing that obviously with way more complexity and way more motion. So Michael's, any thoughts you have, Michael, on just kind of go to market and think you wish you knew when you started your career, and how things either fall apart, or what have you seen work from go to market side and enablement side?
Yeah. Well, when it's embedded OEM, you're working much closer with the product engineering and the product management. It's not so much that you develop a joint message. I rarely, when I've been doing embedded licensing, I'm rarely facing the partner's customer, only in really unique situations. But you're working with them, so the product conversation is, imagine what your product could be like, what it would do if you added our capabilities into it. And on the go-to-market message, it's imagine what your messaging could be. Instead of, say, you're a enterprise visibility analytics company and you don't have good visibility into network traffic. That's a blind spot. That's a gap. Maybe it's a competitive disadvantage that you're in a marketplace where others have that. And that's sort of another thing you accomplish sometimes with embedded licensing. You get embedded in 2 or 3 companies and you start to create demand among the others, right? That everybody wants parity. So your partner is dealing with that gap and you're helping them figure out how to close it. So you're much more involved in, like, what would your messaging be? What would you be able to say to your customers by virtue of the fact that you've embedded this capability? And then the strategic part, it's both maintaining that level of commitment. I addressed that before. You can't be halfway into this because they'll smell it and run off. So to retain customers, you really need to stay committed, keep investing. And in a lot of ways, your roadmap on the OEM side becomes a reflection of your partner's roadmap. They contribute to you the requirements that you get, that kind of visibility, like what's the next thing that we need to add to our product to keep enabling them. And in the best partnerships, they keep coming back to you. I've experienced new product innovations because an OEM partner said, it's great that you do this, but could you use your capabilities to do this other thing? And, we take a look at it and say, like, yeah, we could. And that has launched, derivative versions, new features, new products. So it's much more that sort of that functional teaming that helps you keep supplying them with what they need and helps them keep looking at the future of what their roadmap needs. And you do that and you're partners for decades. You try to do a one and done in OEM, you won't be able to last it.
Interesting. You'll be one and done for sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
Literally.
same thing.
But we got another question here. How do you overcome the internal resistance that often leads them to believe they can and should build it themselves and not OEM your product? Raja, any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I think this is where the commitment at the level where you need to get commitment from comes into play. I mean, so you've got product leadership, which includes engineering leadership, right? And you've the go-to-market side of it. If one side feels that this is a strategic relationship and the other one thinks that it's a side project, it's not going to be successful. So this is the due diligence in all of this is important. Look, at the end of the day, we have limited time, limited bandwidth, limited capacity, and we have to be prioritizing who do we work with, where's that alignment, where's the long-term growth. And I think, executive level commitment is important. So you don't see, halfway through the journey of getting this thing enabled, the direction changes and all of a sudden, you're left with diminished sponsorship from the other side or from your own side for that matter. So make sure that there is alignment and this is what you want to do, and make sure that the other side feels that that's what they want to do and they're in it for the long term.
Love that. Michael, any additional thoughts on that question?
Yeah, but that is at least one of the two real pitfalls in this selling model. The dreaded "not invented here" NIH. Yeah, that's often a point of resistance. That's hard to overcome if somebody embodies it and believes it strongly. Sometimes it's just defensive. They don't want to replace the engineering team. The only way to get past that is really to emphasize that you're willing to design your business model with the same set of flexibility and capability that your technology brings, and that you will work with them to make sure that there's a return on value. It's a value conversation then. What does it really? Yes, you could do it, but do you really want to invest in something that's not your core competence? It's back to maybe that natural OEM thing. Yeah, I did sell content repositories for a while, and companies would say like, we could offshore develop this. We got a plan. Or we'll do something with open source, whatever. And it just becomes not just the cost of doing that, but then it's the cost of maintaining that solution. Like maybe you can quickly pull something together, but are you going to invest in that same way I am, because it's the core of my business? If even if you aren't yelling for capability, I've got other large companies eating me up for the same capability. I'm an extension of your development team. You can go and deploy those resources elsewhere. That value conversation is the only thing that can get you past that. It's one of the harder objections. If an individual, the head of development embodies that, you might need to move on to the next opportunity, which also isn't a bad strategy, because sometimes you plant the seed and say, hey, let us know how that works out for you. And it's happened more than once that taking that approach has led to a re-engagement 6 months later saying, it turns out we don't have the resources and time to do what we thought we could, and we want to take a look at your technology again.
Super, super great. Thanks for sharing. We got a couple minutes left here. We'll take one more question from Jack. Jack asks, if you are a startup, a good OEM deal would literally make your company. If I'm a large company, why would I take the risk on a startup? And why not just do it ourselves? Any tips on how to break through and how to structure a deal to minimize? So I think maybe the contrast between being a small company versus going into a large company, how do you minimize the risk? Obviously, the value proposition. Obviously, I heard playing the long game and investing for the long haul, not just trying to do a short win. But even just building that trust. How do you build that trust with those large organizations? Besides hiring one of you two to go build the trust. But yeah, any thoughts on that? Raj, I'll start with you.
Well, look, it's a number one. If you're a really small player and you've got something that's of value to a larger OEM, one thing that you have going for you is they get to influence the direction of the product and how this, because you don't have an established install base. So there's, early formative stages. That's an important advantage. I'd rather, if I'm the larger OEM, I'd rather go with somebody that I'm convinced has the competency and the commitment, and that they can build something that's going to be more suitable to what I need. So that's something that I would focus on. Look, relationships are important, right? How do you establish trust? That's an age-old question, and you have to sell the OEM partner on what your future strategy is, and that's not that you're going to be around for 100 years, right? We all have our exit strategy and so forth, and that's not necessarily. Having that kind of conversation is not necessarily a bad thing. If you've got a larger OEM partner that's working with us and we have an exit strategy and they want to buy us, there's another option, right? And I think both sides kind of know that, and it's as long as there's value for both in this relationship, in this partnership, then I wouldn't really worry about that.
I love that, Roger. Thanks for sharing. Michael.
Yeah. You have a very astute audience, Taylor. They're hitting all the hot button issues. And vendor viability is I think the bucket that one falls into. You're going after a big prospect. Raj's right. You can get a long way by establishing trust. And you pull out all the tricks. Hey, if it's your first big logo, you don't redline their contract too much. You're in a position where you're not driving. You might need to take a few hits on the first deal. It wouldn't be the first time you say, that was our first OEM deal. We just said yes to everything, because once you establish that, what you want to secure is name rights. Like a lot of times when you're in the OEM embedded business, they say, great, well, but no press release, no attribution. If they leave you in the dark, that can be painful because you want to keep pointing like, there's this big company, it's headquartered here. And if I could tell you, I would, but I can't. You want to get name, you want to extract something that you can use to go to market. So, you kind of need to accommodate the bigger company because the leverage and the opportunity is there. There's tactical things too. Hey, if we go out of business, here's source code escrow. Here's residual rights. There's ways to address it contractually that sort of encircle the trust. But really, do they trust you? Do they think your technology is viable? And, if it's good and unique, it's not like they have a great alternative that happens to be bigger than you. And you've got a singular focus. So that's a powerful argument. You're make or break for us, partner. If we screw this up, we've screwed up our whole business. We've got a lot of skin in this game. So, you can trust us. We're not going to take your money and disappear.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I think, on one level, it almost seems counterintuitive, Michael, because I feel like you could be like you're being vulnerable, but on another level, it's showing your commitment. It's showing that and also like, we're in this to win this for you and for us. And if we don't figure this out, it's going to hurt us probably more than it's going to hurt you. So that's, and also I appreciate what you said about, you putting in the extra effort or you not, I know when I've worked with partners, I think it's a great, if they're way bigger than you and you're gaining way more, then you do the heavy lifting, right? You maybe invest more, do more things. And because, it's worth it, number one. And then number two, you're probably going to get much further and get much more momentum. And then Raja, I really appreciate what you said in closing around even M&A, because I know that's a hot topic, especially in cybersecurity. And if I were thinking about building a product that's OEM focused, I could think about that long-term strategy of, hey, I build a product that I know it's OEM, but my goal is ultimately to have an acquisition through that. And I think that's brilliant. And I love that strategy. And people have a lot of solutions. And I think, the future of a lot of cybersecurity, I think, is going to be how do we either complement the current solutions out there? How do we integrate well? And then versus like, and I think there's be a ton of opportunity there. I think we're already seeing it with the M&A space. So super cool. I know we didn't get to all the questions in the chat, but I think we covered most of them. We're up on time here. Thanks so much, Raja and Michael, for all of your insights. Thanks for all the questions from the audience. I think in big picture, OEM is, from my perspective, a really phenomenal go-to-market strategy. And I think the potential is really limitless. And there's obviously the investment, like anything, there has to be an investment. But I think the payoff, it sounds like, could be pretty exponential and even lead to things like exits, right? Like having your strategic partner buy you, which is pretty cool, especially since go-to-market is so hard. And I think having that ability to have even that clear path to acquisition is super cool. So thanks everyone for joining. Thanks again, Raja. Thanks, Michael. We'll catch you all next time on the Security Revenue Live Show. Thanks again.
Thank you, Taylor.
Thanks, Taylor. Bye.